Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation to present. As you mentioned, I have been around, one of Don's first hires when he founded the center in 95, and I've been there since 1995. So it's my pleasure to talk to you today about a little bit about what we do. I will present a high altitude overview. So I guess it's no coincidence, Don talked about the 10-step process, and Bob and Daniel have spoken about the three pillars. If you look at the blue bubbles here on the screen, the Drought Center has really been formed around those three basic principles of the three pillars. Our job as a boundary organization is to translate science to the public and to the media and to decision makers and policymakers. So we do this with the goal of providing usable information that they can use to inform better decision making and better policy. And education and outreach are critical aspects of collaboration that I will show you examples of. As we are a very applied shop by nature, we work with folks all around the world, around 90 countries to date. This map just shows you in the countries in light blue and dark blue, the countries we've worked with over the last 5 years alone, the countries in dark blue over the last year. We have several projects underway with partners in the United Nations, IDMP, for example, FAO, UNCCD, and others. Some of our other projects are with USAID, working with countries abroad, as well as developmental banks such as the World Bank. How do we do this? Well, we don't do this in a vacuum. We have, over the years, built up a nice library. All of these resources are freely available on our website. Unfortunately, not all of them are in Spanish. Obviously, the UN documents are translated into several languages. But I would encourage you to take a look at any of these guides on our website. That URL I will give you at the end of the talk, or just Google the Drought Mitigation Center. The question has come up many times: who do you work with? Who's responsible for drought planning? And I think you'll see here it's really spread out amongst a diverse set of agencies or ministries. Emergency management, private sector, top center in green. Planning and drought was done with practitioners with the American Planning Association. So these aren't just us in our comfort zone talking with other scientists, but rather reaching out and getting feedback to user needs from folks like planning practitioners, for example. And we have developed over the years many resources and guides around the three pillars: drought risk management, all three pillars. And I will touch on some of those specifics here in the next few slides, including the handbook that Bob mentioned that's in the bottom right on drought indicators. So I've put circles around the three pillars here. I won't go into this again because it's been covered nicely, but what I do want to do is show you on the next slide, in these particular regions, those numbers that are in red are where they are working in those pillars. Are they working in just pillar one? Has it expanded to pillar two and pillar three? I'll touch a little bit more on the specific Latin American efforts in a little bit here. But in the middle, one of our current projects involving the Middle East and North Africa is developing work around the first two pillars right now, with the goal of expanding into pillar three in the coming years. We've worked to develop composite drought indicators, following a model very similar, at least on the scientific backbone of the US Drought Monitor, but a different approach, a more data mining, machine learning approach, and using experts to validate that on the ground. We've worked in a lot in Africa right now in the Greater Horn region. A couple of our staff are from Ethiopia, and in the top right, more recently, in Southern Africa as well, in Botswana, Eswatini, and now Tanzania and Zimbabwe. There we're working on typically the first pillar. It's typically enough to get a success story, get some momentum, show something that there's progress that people can rally around, put their logos on. Same thing goes for Brazil. When you look at the northeastern Brazilian Drought Monitor that is now expanding rapidly across much more of the country, thanks to efforts and champions like Eduardo Martins. Here, how do we do it? Decision support. Can we make it usable? Can we make it informative? A lot of different tools covering a lot of different areas. In the top left, we've done a lot specifically with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically the Office of the Chief Economist, with a goal of showing how drought is impacting the various commodities. This is a real simple GIS exercise, but very powerful. On the bottom right, we've heard a lot about social media. My assistant director, Dr. Kelly Smith, she spent a lot of her dissertation exploring ways to integrate Twitter, social media, apps on smartphones. How can we combine that data showing impacts on the ground and see how it matches or marries up with our physical drought indicators and see if it matches reality? So we're starting to investigate ways of scraping this using machine learning and combining it with our physical data to develop more robust drought risk vulnerability maps. On the top right, we've developed a drought risk atlas, 5,000 stations with data going back 60 to 100 years, with a bunch of maps and composite indicators off of those maps as well. So the Drought Monitor is the current state of the science in our country that I helped co-found back in the late 90s. And we have been working with our partners at NOAA, which is basically our Met service, for those of you that aren't familiar with that acronym, and the Department of Agriculture. We started with about a dozen experts across the country that were sort of our ground truthers. Now we are at over 450 experts. This network is invaluable. It gives attribution and it gives ownership to a large group of people across all agencies and at various scales, from the very local level, university extension, state government, and up to tribes and the federal government as well. This has become the tool that is the trigger for a lot of policy, particularly in our farm bill or our agricultural policy. For livestock producers, conservation reserve program, and others. So it was sort of an example of what I like to say science before policy, which was good. It wasn't driven necessarily by policy telling us here's what you have to do. We developed this product and they vetted it over several years and then adopted it into their policy or trigger mechanisms. This is a recent map here from last week. The new map comes out later today, early tomorrow. You can see we are right now seeing pretty significant drought in the western half of our country. With La Nina developing, that would typically mean potentially some expansion, even more so along the southern tier states of our country. So 2020-21 is shaping up to be a pretty significant drought year or a multi-year drought, and many impacts associated with that. Water supply, fires have been a big issue this year in the West, and agriculture as the fall crops have been very dry so far. I mentioned combined drought indicators or composite indicators. This is a method I've been employing for many, many years, working with many countries, and it comes in different shapes and sizes. This is just an infographic to show you some of the ways we package data to hopefully make it not so intimidating and to let people know that they can do this. This is a process that can be done. This is an example from Jordan where we've used primarily remotely sensed data. You can use a combination of in situ or satellite derived, or it could be all in situ, or it could be all satellite derived. So it's a very flexible system that relies on local collaborations and validation at the ground level to determine what are the best weights to produce this final map that is a blended composite indicator. This is then used hopefully trigger action, right, within a plan or policy. So again, you need all three pillars: the risk and vulnerability. Maybe the weightings are different in that area, and you need it to trigger something on the policy side as well. So in Latin America specifically, going back now, a decade or more in some of these cases that I've shown here in this collage, northeastern Brazil, of course, was a very collaborative effort we did with the World Bank and FUNSEMI. Eventually, then, as that became adopted, ANA came into play with the water ministry there. But working with Eduardo Martins and FUNSEMI, the initial states in the Northeast started developing a very similar product. We brought them up to Lincoln. We worked with Mario Lopez. They went and visited Mexico. And we went down there several times to Northeast Brazil and worked with them on the ground and training those authors to do a similar process as the U.S. Drought Monitor, but making it their own. Each of those states has a network of people on the ground contributing information. So very, very rewarding experience working with the Brazilians. And now, as I understand, and Eduardo mentioned earlier, expanding hopefully nationwide soon. You can see over the years too, we've worked on the bottom right, the North American Drought Monitor worked with Mexico extensively in Conagua to develop what we had done in the United States starting in 1999, while we started the North American product in 2002, and have been doing that on a monthly time step, whereas the U.S. Drought Monitor is weekly. Mexico actually does theirs now biweekly, so they have moved to a more frequent update of that map, looking at water districts within the country of Mexico, and again, expanding that, transferring that knowledge and technology, and working with partners in Canada and Mexico for the continent. Kazalak was another group we did some work on drought, and as well as more recently CISA, of course. Things like getting the code out there for the SPI. 10, 15, 20 years ago in some of these Southern American countries, I remember Met Services and Hydro Services contacting us as early as the first year we started, as we adopted the SPI at the Drought Center back in '95 as sort of our tool for monitoring. And then also we've been working the last several years now with the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology in Barbados. We're working on all three policies there. And I think of all the regions I've worked in my career of 25 plus years, they are actively engaged in all three pillars right now and pushing forward very hard. They understand the impacts of climate change, not just from a sea level rise standpoint, but too much or too little, too many hurricanes, or getting La Niñas where you get situations where if they don't get tropical activity, then they don't get fresh water. So it varies across the gamut here. Impacts have come up a lot today. I just want to take the last few slides to discuss a couple last minute points. Impacts. Impacts are critical. This is being done at the Drought Center. We started back in 1995 as the first comprehensive drought impact database in the world. We have expanded that now again to capture into social media with people in smartphones, that they can submit their impacts very quickly through their phones to us and through other networks that are now feeding into our national network. There are others besides the Drought Center that help us do that, including our new condition monitoring observation system and collaboration with the community. It's called COCORAS. This is a grassroots network that collects rain, hail, and snow data. But about 10 years ago, we approached them to put drought information into that interface to their 20+ thousand observers around the country, with a few in Canada and Mexico as well. The goal, of course, here is to marry up impacts to indicators. And now we have started several efforts, one with the UK, Germany, and Australia that recently ended, called one of the driver projects. That was a Belmont Foundation project for 3 years. And more recently with NIDIS in the United States, we're trying to change a paradigm here as well, that we must monitor impacts in the same way that we monitor precip or temperature or snow or stream flow. But we don't. It's not a priority, and it needs to be, because it's perhaps the best indicator of where we are most vulnerable to drought. It's the face of drought. Planning, all scales, right? This is a living process. We've really seen a request on the bottom two there at the individual level with producers and ranchers. Hundreds, actually over 1,000 now, ranchers have participated in our workshops over the last 5 years on how they can produce a drought plan, even at the ranch level. They have a lot of institutional memory in their brains, right? But they haven't always put it down on paper and shared that, so that there's lessons learned and best practices we can share with other ranchers to make a more resilient sector. Community level, drought-ready communities done with NOAA and NIDIS. American Planning Association that I already talked on earlier there at the community level. And then several tribes we've worked with, and then at the basin level up to the national level. So all scales, many different entities involved at all those scales. It's not just a top-down approach, right? And we found that where these typically, back when Don started, there were like 2 or 3 states that had drought plans in the late 70s, early 80s. Now we have all but 3 states with plans, but only about a third of those are what we would call mitigation plans. So we still need to promote the proactive approach. So our work is certainly not done. We've seen a lot more integration of drought plans into a variety of platforms. Tough times for resources, people wearing many hats. It's oftentimes efficient that it's included within something like a climate change adaptation plan, a multi-hazard plan, or a water plan. Drought's a very big piece or part of that, or like we would always encourage, it can be standalone as well. But at the end of the day, it's never a prescriptive process. Who leads that? Context matters as to the local politics and resources to get the job done. So we have to be flexible. The last thing I'll mention here, I think, before wrapping up, this has really come on in the last 5 years as well. We get requests almost every week, I think, for, can you help us put on a drought management exercise or simulation or a game? So what we've done is we put together a guide to drought management exercises to show the variety of tools that are out there. Oftentimes, some of these are don't require many resources, to the very robust ones that do, and where they actually model a basin to run through a drought scenario exercise using future drought scenarios, or tying together droughts that have happened in the past and trying to stress a drought plan. It's a nice way to test a drought plan or inform a drought planning process. So I've seen it used both ways. So what we have seen over the years here at the Drought Center and working with colleagues has been that this cycle forms, where as your monitoring early warning systems improve, that the need on the drought risk management and services side increases. As those planning and mitigation and service strategies improve, the need for even better drought monitoring and early warning forms. So it's a positive cycle. Sometimes you might hear this called a vicious cycle, but in this case, a good vicious cycle, with the goal here of the key being that there needs to be this value added piece of people. I don't think computers, you can throw everything in a computer and spit out a number that represents a drought, right? We have impacts, we have all the sectors that are affected, and the economics of that it's not simply just spitting out a number. Oh, -2 means this. I mean, drought is not that simple. So that information, that value-added approach that people like you as experts on this call, I think that's a critical piece of informing the drought risk management cycle. And finally, the Drought Mitigation Center, again, we're very applied, working with people on the ground and our collaborators to develop usable information and services with the goal of reducing impacts to society. And hopefully, as you've seen, I think this consistent message from all of our speakers so far, Don and Roger and today Daniel and Bob, that we're coordinating this messaging much better after the high level meeting. And the three pillars have really been, I think, a very good foundation to do that. So I appreciate your time and would welcome any questions, or feel free to follow up with me offline after the conference as well. Thanks again to the organizers for the invitation to talk to you today.
Thank you very much, Mark. Very clear and interesting. Let me move right away to the questions because we're running a little bit late. Karina Obregon from Peru asks, what procedure does the Mitigation Center use to combine various drought indices to focus or to identify areas which are more prone to the occurrence of droughts?
Yeah, we could have a workshop all 2 days just on this subject. This is the work we've done the most amount of work in all countries, several countries over the last 5 to 10 years. There's two main, let me simplify it. There's two main processes. One would be subject matter expertise on the weighting. The second, which is probably, it takes a little bit more time and research, is to use machine learning, primarily like a principal components analysis, to look at the inputs. What are the relationship between those inputs? But I still think you need a validation process. No matter which process you choose, you need the experts on the ground to validate and verify those maps for both all of the individual inputs that may be within the combined drought indicator, as well as the combined drought indicator itself. Looking at the history going into drought and coming out of drought for each indicator, as well as the CDI, that takes a little bit of time and research, but then it matches reality on the ground. And then can you map impacts to those indicators in the CDI? So those are the two main approaches we use.
Thank you, Mark. Hori from the IDB comments on, and we said yesterday that drought is sort of a different animal. And he wonders if multi-hazard plans work well for drought, because many countries in Latin America view risks as the ones that are rapid onset. And he also says that the Sendai framework doesn't place a high priority on drought either. Do you have any comments, Mark?
Well, I think that is the challenge, and Don can certainly speak to this, and probably Daniel and Bob too. Drought, yeah, I would say, sure. Even in the United States, for example, our federal emergency management agency requires each state and counties to have multi-hazard plans. It does not require them to have drought plans. So instead of no drought plan, sure, we would encourage drought to be a part of a multi-hazard plan. The caveat there is that drought is a different beast from a spatial and temporal standpoint. The spatial footprint, the potential to last for months or years even. Emergency managers typically are used to working on hazards that have a very quick hitting nature to them and a relatively small spatial footprint. Drought presents different challenges for monitoring and planning. So as long as they take those aspects into account, I think it can be a part of any planning process, even if it's not standalone, versus no drought plan at all. I think I would rather see it be a part of a multi-hazard plan. But there are challenges because of a different mindset of who's going to manage those plans that are different between agriculture, water, and emergency management, for example.
Thank you, Mark. What the two last questions, and I'll save one from the end. Maria de Estrada asks if in your impact monitoring you include environmental impacts as well, and if so, through which means?
Absolutely. This has been another emerging topic, two emerging topics I debated talking about today, but just don't have enough time. And I hope to see and meet you. I know a lot of people on this call. Very good to see a lot of good friends. I think this is something for a conversation in the next workshop. Ecological environmental drought has been a big push in the last 5 years as well. You always hear about agricultural drought, right, and meteorological drought, hydrological drought, social economic drought. I think there's becoming an acceptance in the last 5 years to the idea of ecological environmental drought. And there's been groups that have coordinated on research and messaging and defining just what that is. There are, as Don said, right, hundreds of definitions. So I don't think it's any problem to add ecological drought to that field. So it's a nascent area right now, though, but very critical because oftentimes I still think it's tied to soil moisture like ag is, but we see ecological impacts sometimes sooner than agricultural drought, and all of that depends on timing. So yes, the short answer is absolutely. I think there is a need to consider environmental ecological services and the impacts that drought have on them.
And one last question from Leandro, which I was going to ask myself, is does the Mitigation Center plan to do anything in the CISA region?
As you know, Guillermo, we've had some conversations with you on working with you on combined indicators. Would always welcome the opportunity to. I showed the one slide that showed some of the past activities in Brazil. We've been to Argentina several times, Bahia Blanca, and working with some of the livestock producers down there to look at what indicators can show forage conditions because we don't have a lot of in situ data in these remote areas. We've developed indices like quick dry and veg dry in the United States to aim at that particular audience. Chile with Kazalak and others over the years, and then the recent workshop in Bolivia had many follow-up conversations with Bolivia and other countries in the CISA region, as well as Latin America and in the Caribbean. So always open to ways to build on that collaboration going forward with CISA and others in the region.
Mark, this question or your answer was recorded, so remember that. Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Mark.